Hello everyone, Bag here. It's that time folks, we've got another 8-unit patch ahead of us in 4.2, with Silverwolf 999, Dahlia, Firefly, and Castorice on the first half, and Evanescia, Tribbie, Sunday, and Feixiao on the second half. So let's waste no more time and get into what's worth your polls. First off, let's talk about Superwolf. Superwolf is a rather straightforward carry in what she wants and in how she plays. First things first, I want to talk about her situation with her team building, as it is very relevant to her pull ability. We've come down from the heavens of Ashfield's flexibility, with having like half a dozen best in slot partners, and now with Superwolf, it's kind of elation or bust. To answer all of the I don't knows that I said in my 4.0 pull priority video, Yao Guang is best in slot for both 4.2 relation carries, and more than that, she is the most important teammate for both of them to have. For Superwolf, you can get by with a Sparksy EMC core, and that'll still clear just fine while we're in the middle of relation shilling, but Yao Guang EMC will be a better core to use as a baseline, and I would go as far to say that unless if things get very mixed up heavily with future relation supports, I wouldn't recommend going for Superwolf if you don't already have Yao Guang, or if you're not committed to get her on a rerun. Sparksy is just a very worthwhile upgrade over EMC, and she will become more important outside of relation shilling when external mechanics don't do a lot of a job for her. This says nothing about if you have neither of Sparksy or Yao Guang. If you do not care about elation and you just want to make do with the scraps on your account for Superwolf's team, then frankly, good luck. But on the flip side, if you do want to be all in on elation, then Superwolf is for sure strong enough to warrant that investment. Superwolf is very simple in how she is played, with a somewhat rigid amount of turns due to her 3-turn enhanced state. Especially when compared to how min-maxy Evanescia can be, Superwolf is instead a more consistent unit to make use out of, with a somewhat lower ceiling of skill expression. So then, to connect back to the dilemma I laid out earlier, a large potential factor in getting Superwolf over other options is dependent on whether or not you want to buy into elation in general. Elation shilling is going to ramp up the more elation carries get added to the game. This does not mean elation is a must-have check that your account needs to have, but it does mean it will artificially have more value so long as the game favors the archetype. Currently, there are no Polix level checks to make elation feel needed, and the 3 elation focused bosses are all relatively simple to brute force, while just giving more resources to elation teams to give them a manufactured edge. So for now, it's less of a good luck clearing if you don't have elation, and more of a wave that you can choose to ride. Either you benefit from the shilling and let it take its course, or you resist it and invest in elsewhere. I personally don't think an elation team is needed to succeed, but that doesn't mean it won't be easier to have one in your pocket. If nothing else, don't worry about her strength level. In and out of elation shilling, she'll be one of the strongest carries in the game on her release. We'll talk about how she compares to Evanescia in the Evanescia section. So beyond the context of elation, and if you have or will get her teammates, it's a very simple question of do you want a new very strong carry for your account? No carry is a must-have, but if there's a gap on your account that she's set up to fill, then by all means let her fill it. Oh, and she also has a global passive. I wouldn't ever recommend pulling for someone for a global passive, but it is a pretty decent account boon that'll be relevant way past her stay in the meta. So if that matters to you at all, then well, there you go. As for her vertical investment, first of all, I would not recommend getting any of her verticals before getting her best in slot team, especially Yao Guang, so make sure you save enough pulls to prioritize them on their reruns. Beyond that, for Superwolf herself, her S1 is marginally better than her E1, while also being cheaper. As for her E2, well, Superwolf's E2 is really good, but it becomes amazing when fully activated, which may or may not be easier to do with future elation upgrades to the team. And without those theoretical future upgrades, it'll either rely on elation shilling, or some combination of Sparksy E2, Yao Guang E1, and Superwolf S1. It is possible to fully activate Superwolf's E2 without super high investment through waiting on using Superwolf's ult to give her a higher starting amount of hidden MMR, but the idea would be to be able to funnel enough ult charge naturally as to not interrupt her game plan. So my personal recommendation would be to wait on E2 until Superwolf's rerun, as then you're working with the most amount of information possible. But E2 is still fine to go for now if you are confident that you'll get what's needed for it to be fully activated, in whatever form that might take, or if you're fine with it not being fully activated, which is fine as even then it is still a very solid Eidolon. Superwolf's E2S0 will be better than her E1S1, but on top of that, it will also age much better when it is fully activated, so keep that in mind as well. Moving on to Castorice, who, yeah, people are pretty opinionated on this. Looking at it, this is kinda like how I talked about Rappa and Boothill in their last few patches, in that her needed supports just reran. So if you wanted to make the decision to play Castorice, you hopefully did so in 4.0 with getting Evernite and in 4.1 with getting Hycene. If you have these units and you have the pulls for easier S1 Castorice, you could also just invest more into Evernite and make her the carry by getting her to E2 instead, provided that you have Cyrene, as she's pretty important here. Although this is not needed to do, as getting Castorice to complete the Monorem core will be incredibly strong in its own right. If you don't have Evernite or Hycene, and preferably Cyrene, then Castorice becomes a lot less worth it. As time goes on, compromising on best in slot teammates will become a lot less viable, especially when justifying getting a year-old carry that is only relevant due to how good her entire team is as a package. I am the biggest lover of Gallagher Castorice teams, but I would never recommend pulling for it in 1,000 years. But even besides that, as I've said before, Monorem is not a team that is obligatory to invest into solely due to its prominence in the current meta. It's an incredibly strong core with practically an infinite amount of vertical investment, so as long as you're committed to give the team more and more going forward, it's perfectly reasonable to rely on vertically investing into Monorem instead of going for the newer, shinier comps if those newer comps don't interest you. But while Monorem right now is still doing well at a reasonable amount of cost, those newer comps will, first off, do better at lower cost through being shilled, and then will likely be stronger at lower cost when their comps are fully complete. So again, ignoring meta developments with Monorem is a perfectly viable option, but it's always a semi-risky bet to go against the new and stick to the old. That's true for any gacha game. This is, however, only assuming high-end clears, such as being able to brute force King or Hard Knight stages in Anom. If all you want is a team that can clear normal endgame at a reasonable cost, then Monorem will do more than fine without high investment for a good while longer. Just don't expect to be able to stay at a 4-cost full E0 S0 team and be able to keep up with the best teams in the game, as that page in Monorem's history will be coming to a close. Castorice also does have a global passive, which again I wouldn't pull for her just for this, but I can't deny that it is a factor, so give it as much weight as you think it deserves. I can't stop you. For Castorice's own vertical investment, it's a case where E2 S0 is a priority over E1 S1, with S1 being much better than E1. So if you have the pulls for 2 upgrades, go for E2. If you have the pulls for 1, go S1. Moving on, Dahlia is maybe the easiest unit to talk about in the entire game. If you care about break, she's a must pull. If you don't, then she's a must skip. It's really as binary as that. If you want to go more into if break is something to care about, then we can combine this with talking about Firefly, who has firmly ultra cemented herself as the face of break after her Nova Flare. That Nova Flare is a bit boring, but the main things are the gigantic extra super break ratio and her E2 being usable every turn. At E0, she is an incredibly strong carry, especially if you are able to go sustainless, which Firefly is the best break carry at doing so with her natural tankiness. As I talked about in my 4.1 video, there are a good amount of merit in having a non-crit check on your account, from dealing with Anom stage debuffs to having more curated teammates that makes team building easier for Anom in not sharing any overlap with any other carries. These benefits aren't exclusive to Firefly, or break in general, but with her competition in mind, she is strong enough to justify the investment. Low-cost teams are also pretty easy to make, past just getting the Dahlia, with HMC and Ranmei with her E1 being free. Fugue is also a great teammate that can help free up the Trailblazer, but she isn't necessary for her to perform, although her extra toughness does become a lot more important after Firefly's E2 to make it more consistent to proc. Break does also scale well with investment, with Dahlia, Fugue, and Firefly having great Eidolons. So like with Monorem, I think investing into it is fair with the expectation of slowly giving more to the team to have it stay relevant for longer than the average team core. Overall, I think Firefly is in a pretty comfortable spot post Nova Flare, but as I just alluded to, I do think long term it will eventually be an expectation to have her at E2. Not in that she needs it right now, but in that it will let her ceiling stay high enough to compete as we go further into the meta. So if you are not committed to get her E2 at some point in the future, if not now, then it might be a good idea to look for another team instead. So yeah, gunning for E2 Firefly is the best bet if she is the only break carry that you care about. Then you can get Fugue to fully activate E2, but she's not rerunning right now, so for now I would say S1 Dahlia is the next best upgrade, then E1 Dahlia, then E2 Dahlia, which are both very solid jumps. S1 Firefly is entirely unneeded, as Aeon is amazing for her, and you can even run Fine on Sync if you have it. After this, you are really set, but you can still invest into Fugue, E1, and E2 if you want to go even further. Also, yeah, do not get Firefly without also getting the Dahlia. She's maybe the most necessary support for a relevant carry in the entire game. Also, Dahlia's prevalence applies to a similar degree to the other break carries if you do care about them. E2 Dahlia combined with other sources of weakness break efficiency also completely breaks Himiko in Pure Fiction and makes her the easiest 40k merchant in the game. So there's also that if that interests you. I'll plug you to subscribe. The next video up will be a full guide and teammate tier list for Evanescia. So if you'd like to see that or this type of content for future units, then sub to stick around. Alright, back to the vid. Moving on to the second half banners, let's talk about Evanescia. First things first, if you are clicking on this video and jumping to this timestamp to see the answer of who is stronger between Evanescia and Superwolf, then let me give you the rundown. Essentially, the two carries perform very similarly in most contexts, but Evanescia has a slight edge, basically only due to the fact that one of her best teammates is free. So from a cost perspective, she just has a head start due to being able to be essentially equal to Superwolf's performance with one less premium teammate. Superwolf can have a higher theoretical ceiling due to having one more premium teammate to vertically invest into, although for these units' releases I believe low cost comparisons to be much more relevant, as by the time high cost teams are expected, the Elation landscape will be entirely different from any comparison we can make here. But this is assuming you are starting a team from scratch, as if you already have Sparksy, then this difference is mitigated. Beyond any strength comparisons though, though, Evanescia's actual gameplay is maybe the most important factor to consider above any other surrounding context. This gameplay revolves around her high-cost ultimate that is linked to her Certified Banger, as getting Certified Banger gives energy and vice versa. So it's a balancing act where you want to power up her ultimate with Certified Banger, but that resource that powers it up also then leads to overcapping your ultimate if you aren't careful. I think it looks really fun, and to be transparent, I personally am on Team Evanescia, but I can also see it being annoying to play around if you don't want to learn about the team's feel. Evanescia having one less best-in-slot premium teammate also comes with its own set of assumptions. Maybe this means she has more room to grow without strictly vertically investing into existing options, or maybe it indicates that she'll be given less tools to work with and is assumed to vertically invest to stay strong in the far future. There's no real way for me to answer this, but if it's any consolation, she does have really good early vertical investment. So if you are committed to picking up some stuff now or on future reruns, then she'll be more than comfortable on your account long term. Or long term for a carry standards anyways. Other stuff I said about Superwolf also applies here. While Evanescia does lose slightly less when using non-elation teammates, I would still say using her long term without Yao Guang is a sizable loss. It is technically possible to vertically invest into Evanescia to brute force her way to being good, but this is far from optimal compared to biting the bullet and getting Yao Guang. Evanescia definitely became more elation focused over the course of her pre-release cycle, so while generic supports are still entirely workable, the recommendation for getting her as strong as she can be with as low cost as possible is to get Yao Guang if you don't already have her. She also really likes Huohuo, who is free but is also skippable with the prospect of there being an eventual catered elation sustain. So if you don't want to spend your free currency on Huohuo, then that'll matter more here than on Superwolf teams. With them making Evanescia more elation focused and less generic support focused, what we are left with is a carry with a very similar role and strength level compared to Superwolf, which makes distinguishing them pretty hard. But this also means, again, you don't need to worry about her strength. It's not a throw to pick her over Superwolf, nor is it a throw to pick Superwolf over her. If you don't know who to invest into, I think it's as simple as, do you want to pull for their respective best-in-slot teammates? Do you like either of their playstyles? Are you willing to get Huohuo from the 5-star shop? And what sort of investment do you already have? As while Sparksy is technically best-in-slot over EMC for Evanescia, again, having her on your account for Superwolf already closes any cost gap that these two would otherwise have. Otherwise, it really is a pull for who you like angle at the end of the day, as the differences between them for now won't really cause much of any difference in clearability for current endgame content, and in the future, how future elation units affect each of their cores will end up mattering much more than how these teams are operating now. This also means who you believe will actually get more impactful future upgrades is another important factor, but that's an entirely speculative point that I do not feel good about actually giving advice on. So I mean, just follow your heart on that one, I guess. Or if you don't have an opinion, then just hope that your side ends up getting favored more, I don't know. As for her vertical investment, as I mentioned, her early verticals are really strong. E1 is better than S1 flat out, although S1 is perfectly fine by itself if you want to prioritize it for being cheaper. Then E2S0 versus E1S1 is very close and will likely vary from fight to fight. E2S0 might have a slight edge sometimes, but I'm still inclined to recommend E1S1 first for, again, being cheaper. But E2S0 would scale a lot better if or when there's a fourth elation teammate on the team for it to scale off of. That also then inversely means that it would be a lot worse if you're trying to play her with less than the standard 2 other elation teammates. I'd also more solidly recommend E2S0 over E1S1 if you're going for a max superimposed Battle Pass like one for her, as then not only is the signature less of an upgrade, but it also loses the advantage of being cheaper if it would be replacing something that you already spent $50 on. Next up is Sunday. Sunday is a unit where a clear distinction needs to be made, one that separates a unit's strength from their pull ability. He's someone that's easy to find a use for on an account. His buffing is generic enough and genuinely helpful in enough use cases to not be bad by any means. But the problem these days with units like him is that the overall meta has shifted away from what made Sunday so amazing. Nowadays, the general guideline for building for endgame and HSR is to focus on building up a few cores with their specialized teammates. Being universal is not nearly as big of a deal, and instead teams are incentivized to have minimal unit overlap to make it easier to build optimal teams for high-end content like Anom. Sunday's strength in this context is in being a backup band-aid support when that overlap does occur. He might have lost a lot of his prominent meta positions, thanks Cyrene, but your account only has one Cyrene, or one RMC, so if all that you're looking for is clear ability with a backup, then depending on the carry, he can be feasible. The problem is, that role is rarely worth it to pull for over getting more units that he would be the backup for. Say if your Heislins and Anoxa are fighting over Cyrene, then you could theoretically get Sunday for Anoxa to fall back on, but the better idea would be to further invest into your dot to free up Cyrene, so then both of your cores are much better off. This is a pretty specific case where Cyrene is very replaceable in that dot team, but instead, if it was someone like My Day, where both teams teams really want Cyrene, then there's still the problem of him being a downgrade on teams that are reliant on Cyrene to remain competitively relevant going forward. Then there's other options where Sunday is perfectly usable, but not the next up in the investment priority in really any context. Like, if you want to boost up Finon's core, pulling for Sunday will be infinitely worse than just vertically investing into Finon or getting Ceredra's E1, and so on and so forth. Sunday is really never on that grocery list for this team, despite still being perfectly fine when used on it. I'd say the only team where he's genuinely worth pulling for is for Aglaya. Saber likes him too, but only when you need him to replace RMC, and Jingyuan also heavily depends on him, but he's not too meta relevant these days. Everyone else, like for example Ashvale, can get by without him. That being said, if you like him, again, it will be easy to find uses for him if you want to justify doing so. Just understand that this probably will not be the most optimal move for your account's next investment. For vertical investment, S1 is a pretty easy recommendation. E1 is good for Aglaya, but it's not a priority over other investment options in that team, while S1 is a genuinely good light cone that can be used in non-Sunday teams, like with putting it on Sparkle for the Energy and SP. Tribbie is weirdly in a similar position to Sunday, as a lot of what I talked about with him also applies to her. Compared to him, Tribbie is an even more universal and versatile filler option that can be slotted in most meta teams in some way. If you want an overall account band-aid that makes team building across 3 teams in ANOM easier, then Tribbie will be just fine for that. But again, it's not going to be worth your pulls most of the time over getting foundational teammates for specific cores instead. She's good for my day teams, but she's not uncontested. She's good at Monorem, but Cyrene is better. She's good with Archer, but not needed. And for Ashvale, well, yes, she might have a place in the future follow-up meta that is currently being brought forth by Ashvale, although since Tribbie is second half, we will know a lot more about if Blade SP will give any additional context by the time she's actually pullable. For now, she is really great with Hypercarry Ashvale, although not strictly needed, and for Feixiao, she is best in slot, but you can compete with her through Robin Eidolons, depending on how many golden crowns you have to spend. She can be a good filler option for literally any team that you can think of, but the only team where she is truly uncontested by anyone else is with the Herda, who is not the most relevant carry to invest into these days. So yeah, like with Sunday, I see them as strong units who are easy to benefit from if you already have them, instead of being units who are actually worth pulling for if you don't have them. If you want to use Tribbie, E1 is an incredibly large recommendation, as if you want to make her more impactful where she's good and more feasible where she's kinda cope, then E1 is your best bet by a mile. I'd say going for E0 Tribbie and staying at E0 forever is not really recommendable at all. So at the very least, if you do want to justify getting Tribbie, you should plan to eventually get her E1, if not on this patch. And lastly, Feixiao. I mean, if you got Asheville for her eventual rerun, then here you go. If you want to get her to E2 to make her more relevant, then it's a very good E2 and she will do fine. But do I generally recommend her? No. She's not purely bad, and in sustainless runs, she has an insane ceiling that has only gotten higher with Ashvale, assuming he can live in sustainless runs in the first place. But for the vast majority of players who are not pushing her to her absolute limits, she is not an optimal pull, especially if or when we get future follow-up units that can take her place in working with Ashvale in the future. Feixiao is firmly in the get her if you like her category. Ashvale has made her more usable, despite being better when played by himself, and she's not completely hopeless if you are committed. But compared to every other carry on this banner, she does have the least going for her. Overall, there are some very worthwhile pickups to get here, and compared to 4.0, it feels a lot nicer to be working with a lot more solid information, even if there is still a good amount up in the air with Elation's future. There's no one here that is a must pull, but it'll be pretty easy to find ways to boost your account's strength if you have or will get the right tools for these new carries to make use of. Going to the channel member corner just to say that I appreciate every single one of you as always. And with that, expect my Evanescia video to come out within the next 12-ish days. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye!